Starting today, academics from 64 universities across the country will begin 14 days of strike action. More than 1 million students will be affected, and the strike has provoked strong reactions, both in support and in opposition. But what are the strikes actually about, and how can students expect to be affected by them? To answer all these questions, we've got Dr. Tess Grant, an Associate Professor of English here at Warwick, and Mary, a student in her penultimate year. So Tess, firstly, thank you for joining us. It's an early morning, we appreciate you being here. For people who don't know very clearly, can you explain to us what the strikes are actually about and why you're doing it?
So Universities UK, which is the employers' institution, has decided that the pension scheme is not viable at the moment. And what they would like to do is they would like to change the way that our pension scheme operates from something called defined benefits, which means that we can guarantee what our pension will be at the end, to a system that is called defined contributions. Defined contributions, which is entirely dependent on the returns of the stock market. Okay. Now, I don't know if you realise this, but 2 years ago, we already went through a huge restructuring of the scheme, and our benefits were made a great deal less good. We used to have final salary pension schemes, and they moved to defined benefits, which we accepted because, you have to. There was a lot of arguing about it, a lot of negotiation, and in the end, we got something that seemed to be, the best possible deal that we could. The issue is that, unfortunately, Universities UK, the employers, are being very disingenuous about their arguments for why they have to do this. And that's a real problem. Of course, there's a lot of sabre rattling, and I have to say, there's a lot of sabre rattling, particularly from Universities UK, who want to fight. It's absolutely clear that they want to fight. And if you look at, for instance, our Vice-Chancellor, Stuart Croft, who is one of the doves, as they call him, he's one of the few, there are now, I think, 6 institutions under this whose Vice-Chancellors have said, look, we need to do further negotiation. What Universities UK are suggesting is, too draconian, not necessary. The issue, of course, is that they won't negotiate. They won't go to ACAS. They won't go to the arbitration service, and that's a real problem because there has been no negotiation. This is something that is essentially going to be imposed upon us. And it is tricky because there's been a lot of disingenuous behaviour. If you look at the numbers that Universities UK have given us, they've factored in things in those numbers which they aren't changing, so to make it look better from their point of view. And if you do the real sums, you realise that actually people are going to be even worse off. And for me, actually, the issue here is that the change from defined benefits to defined contributions hits the people on lowest wages. That's the problem. If you are, a Vice-Chancellor, or if you are, somebody who's a professor who earns over £90,000, actually, defined contributions probably won't make that much difference to what you're doing. So the issue is really just trying to get a decent pension for people who work on, not a low wage, of course, but not a very high wage. You think about it, 7 years in higher education, less than, about the same as a doctor, and we earn half what doctors earn. Of course, we don't save lives. Well, I like to think I save lives in a short way, but you know what I mean. So it is problematic, particularly made problematic by the fact that the teachers' pension scheme, which is what all the other universities, so all the post-92 universities are on the teachers' pension scheme, which is still a defined benefit scheme, and has just moved to a defined. So I'd be much better off if I were at a non-Russell Group university. If I were sensible, I would be moving as soon as possible.
Okay. You mentioned, Tess, in an email that you sent to me that you'd be better off if you'd been a teacher. Obviously, teachers probably earn about half as much as what academics do in terms of their salary, but
I don't think that's true.
Is that not true? I thought sort of teachers were about on 37,000 a year roughly, and then academics are on, for associate professors, about twice that.
What's 27 and 27?
54.
Yeah, okay. I don't think that I would be earning £27,000 if I'd gone into teaching. is my point. I mean, I put into the teachers' pensions scheme the other day to try and find out how much I would have as my pension if I were on those things, and actually it's a hard calculation to do, and I don't think that what came out is probably true, but it's certainly more than I would do if I had been on a defined contribution scheme from the beginning. I'm lucky because, of course, I'm quite old. I'm 45, so I've been in this scheme since I was 29. So I've got, sort of 14 years or something of final salary, and then I've got 2 years that we've just had of defined benefits. So in fact, I'm not going to be hit hardest. So people who are going to be hit hardest are the people who are coming to the profession now. Which just, why would you want a job at a Russell Group university if you were coming into the profession now? You wouldn't. You would want a job at a university that had TPS. I mean, that's as simple as that.
Okay. A figure that's often been bandied around a lot is that academics will be set to lose up to £10,000 a year in terms of their pensions. How true is this?
I think it is true. I've looked at the UCU at Keele has done some sums, and there's a very interesting document that suggests that the average, and the people who are going to be hit hardest are the people who never make it to full professor. So if you basically, if you're a senior teaching fellow for the whole of your career, or if you are at an associate professor level, that's where you stop. So those are the people who are not going to earn a serious amount of money. I mean, these are people who the top of the associate professor scale at the moment is £56,000. So if you don't get any more than that, it's not like you're in stratospheric, money at all. And those are the people who are going to be hit really hard. Anybody who makes it to professor is not going to be hit hard. And that's a problem. So what we're seeing is a kind of widening between Oh, listen!
I can hear the protesters outside.
Yeah. So what I'm really worried about is the widening in difference between the salaries of the people who maybe are senior teaching fellows for the whole of their life, or teaching fellows for the whole of their life, and people who make it into professor, and then they have it's market forces professorship. So basically, you have to argue every year for how much money you should be given, and it can get very high. So I think, that is the problem. I think it is true that a lot of people are going to lose a lot. And what is disingenuous about the UK case is that they've added things in that aren't changing, as I said, like life cover or pension for your dependents and that kind of stuff. So that, there's, of course, people massage the figures, but they're really being very disingenuous, I think, about this.
Okay, we'll go on to the more sort of detailed technical sides of the strike and the reasons why the strike has been put forward, why the pension reforms have been put forward in a moment. But I'm going to come on to Mary now. Mary, obviously you're a student in the English department at Warwick. Just to sort of give us a flavour of what the sentiment among students is about the strike, what do you think of it?
Well, obviously when I first heard about it, I thought, oh my gosh, like the last couple of weeks of my term are going to be taken away from us. And, we've been emailing to people from the department, trying to, because basically people are panicking about exams, people are panicking about, their workload. We're paying a lot of money to be here, unfortunately, which isn't the fault of the academics. And academics have fought time and time again for us to not have our tuition fees raised. So, and, I just thought about how many times they've stuck up for us. And now I think it's time for us to accept this. And I do believe that the academics, particularly in the English department and across the university, they're at Russell Group University. They have a passion for teaching. They have a passion for being here. And they wouldn't be doing this unless they had to do it. And it's very much a last resort. And the one thing that they have to bargain with is their labour. And I think there is a lot of upset and there's a lot of confusion, especially I've spoken to a lot of people about this, and they felt very sort of betrayed almost that their teachers are stopping teaching them, and I think it's just down to a lack of research and thinking that strikes is kind of there's a belief that if you can strike, you're in a privileged position basically to be able to withdraw your labour. You essentially there's an idea that you're saying you don't need the money for the next few weeks, some people obviously do, and it's considered a very privileged position. And one of the arguments that's been put forward to me when I said that I support what's going on is that there's other sectors of society, for instance, more working class sectors of society where they can't afford to strike, they can't afford to give up their labour, and it's almost not right that the academics are like taking this privileged position. But I think that hopefully this is going to set a standard, set a symbol for like all people to have good pensions, because I don't even think that's a very left-wing ideology. I think it's about protecting your wealth that you've worked hard for. So yeah.
Okay, we'll get on to the sort of moral implications and objections to the strike later on. But until then, a little bit more about the reasons for the strike in the first place. The Financial Times last year reported that the USS pension deficit is up to £17.5 billion. Universities UK acknowledges a deficit of £6 billion. So, Tess, you mentioned that there's a lot of sabre rattling here, that people want to fight, but it seems fairly sort of illogical that people would just want to fight for the sheer sake of having a fight. In light of this, it's obvious that money needs to be saved in some way. So if not by reducing fixed pension payments, what is the best way to actually solve the deficit? Would it be more borrowing, a raise of tuition fees?
Okay, let's stop there, Sam.
Okay.
There is no deficit. I mean, pension schemes always look dodgy because they're a long-term investment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the problem with the USS scheme is that it doesn't pass something called Test 1. And Test 1 is something that pension actuaries do to work out what would happen if. So for this is a test that applied very well. So for instance, in the old days when big companies like Philips had a pension scheme, and Test 1 meant, could you meet your liabilities if the company went bust today, right? Now, of course, for a single employer pension scheme, that's really important, Unfortunately, for USS, that doesn't quite work, and it's a very useful test for those people in the UK who want to change the pension arrangements, and we'll come to why they want to do that later. Because it basically argues, that we don't pass Test 1, and everybody goes, oh, God, we don't pass Test 1, that's terrible. The issue is, can you tell me what the likelihood of all the 64 universities going bust at the same time and having to meet their pension obligations is? Not very high. I mean, much less high than Philips, for instance, going bust, okay? Now, with regard to why there might be a potential deficit in the scheme, okay, basically, UUK, the employers, want to pay less into our pension. They want to make less of an employer contribution to our pension. And one way of doing that would be to change the pension arrangements so that we go from defined benefits to defined contributions. Okay, so they're not only suggesting that that we go to defined contributions, but they're also suggesting that the employers should pay less in. Okay, so you can see that it's a cost-saving exercise. Now, Stuart Croft, for instance, is very sensible about this because he realises that it's a cost-saving exercise that actually is going to backfire. Yeah. And what is very interesting about this, and there's another really crucial thing that you need to know about the difference between defined benefit and defined contribution schemes, which is that defined contribution schemes have to be more risk adverse because of the way that they work, okay? Which means that if we move our defined benefit scheme to a defined contributions scheme, we're going to be in a situation where the pot is going to get smaller because we have to be less risky. Okay, yeah. And so in fact, it's a kind of counterintuitive way of making the pension scheme better anyhow, because we're entirely reliant upon the stock market, which the shares may go up and down, as we all know. So there is a problem with that. And the other thing to think about is that the big difference between defined benefit and defined contributions is that in defined contribution schemes, the risk is taken by the individual, whereas in defined benefit schemes, the risk is taken by the scheme. And that is, that's a fundamental pension truth worth fighting for, as far as I can see. So, and I would also like to say, the sabre rattling, in my view, and I'm not an extremist in any way, but the sabre rattling, in my view, from what I've seen in the press, has all come from Universities UK. I mean, the UCU are not famous for being, the most militant of unions, and actually they, that we are all coming out on strike shows you how really serious this is and how it could have been avoided. It really could have been avoided. That's the stupid thing about it. So, I am really sorry that I'm withdrawing my labour and that I'm not teaching my classes on Monday. I mean, I feel really sorry for my students. I know, particularly for my dissertation students who are at a crucial moment. I've got a PhD student who's just about to hand in. But the fact is, it's not my fault. It's the fault of UUK not being prepared to negotiate, not going to ACAS. Okay, so I do, and I'm, as you know, I'm not a particularly militant person in normally. But this is really important, and Mary's completely right, because what she was saying about this setting a new standard or making, setting a precedent is important. If they do this to our pension scheme, which is relatively healthy. Okay, this is a pension scheme where in the height of the stock market in the 1980s, the employers took pension contribution holidays. Right? So relatively healthy, then it means that lots of others, so the civil service pension scheme, the national health pension scheme, the teachers pension scheme, are we all going this way? Do we want to turn into a country where pensions don't work like they have done, where the good of that we spread the risk rather than that everybody has to take that responsibility for their own pension, So this is really why I'm so cross about it.
Okay. You did mention just a moment ago about an idea of there being a precedent set, for future pension schemes. Do you actually think that this will happen?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I mean, if we lose this, that's it. That's a license. I mean, but we have a Tory government with austerity things at the moment who want to cut where they can. Over the last 10 years, we've seen significant changes made to the way that trade unions are allowed to operate. We now have to have a 50% turnout before we can go on strike.
Yeah.
These things were not, were not normal when I was a girl. Although I did live through the 80s. So it is, I do think that this is actually more important than just USS, particularly because USS is not on the verge of collapse. That's the short answer. I mean, it really isn't. And you can basically get an actuarial firm to come in and audit your pension scheme and get it to say what you want it to say. So the most pessimistic calculations have been used in order to allow UK to claim that the scheme is on the verge of collapse. And we don't mind paying more. That's the other thing I was going to say. I have no problem with paying more into my pension as long as it's not money that might just be wasted, which is a possibility with defined contributions.
Okay. Slightly different subject now. The UCU has said that they support the university's decision not to reimburse students for lost contact time. It's sort of always a bit dubious working this out on the sort of back of an envelope with a calculator, but some students have said that they could expect to lose well over £1,000 of teaching time. Is this decision morally justifiable, especially given that academics will go on earning after the strike is over?
Oh, to me. Well, now. Okay, so what's interesting about this is that I can see that it looks to somebody who's done their back of the envelope calculation that their £9,000 has lost them. What did you say?
Upwards of about 1,000 for an English student.
So fine. So for an English student, you have the misfortune to be taught by me. I teach on a Monday, so you've had 3 Mondays knocked out. Okay. The fact is, very little of that money actually goes to pay for lecturing. Somebody did an alternative back of the envelope calculation where they worked out where the money actually goes, where those £9,000 fees actually go, and they worked out that each student at the end of these sort of 4 weeks of actions would actually be entitled, if they were thinking of it that way, so not with the compensation, but with the idea of how much they'd actually paid towards lecturing, to a grand total of £25. So the fact is that the rest of the £9,000 fees that you pay goes to support the rest of the university, so the buildings, everything, the administration, all of the things that are still operating, okay? Now, Mary made a good point to me earlier when we were talking about this, that of course it has disrupted the really important bit of the education. So there's a difference, isn't there, between the money that you would be entitled to be back that you'd actually, not got the service.
And the value of what you're missing.
And the value of what you're missing, so I get that. I would prefer myself a system where each student didn't pay the fees. I would happily pay a penny on income tax I really would, happily pay a penny on income tax to, to fund education properly. I mean, we know that widening participation is affected by this. We know that part-time students can't do it anymore. We look across the board. We know that student fees, do have an effect. They also have an effect on where you go. So, in the old days when you had fees paid and maintenance grants, so a bit like Wales still has, people could move, so you didn't have to go to your home university. Okay, and if you're thinking about widening participation and maximising opportunities for people, it's fine. I mean, often, people are very happy to go to their home university, but at the same time, if you're, from a non-traditional university background and you're really clever and you want to go to a Russell Group university and you live in the middle of nowhere and your nearest university is not a Russell Group university, it may be that the financial calculation means that you cannot go to a Russell Group university, and that is because there's no maintenance grant now, even really for the poorest of students, except in Wales, where we should all move. And you still have to pay those fees. Okay, so I would like the university system to be different. I don't want students to be paying £9,000 fees. I also don't believe that I'm providing you with a service, I'm afraid. I'm not providing you with a service. I'm providing you with the opportunity to become educated. I have skills that will help you to become educated, but I'm not teaching you stuff. I'm helping you to think. So I don't think of myself, I'm not handing you coffee from the other side of the counter. It's not a service. The customer is not always right. And I'm not saying I know best, but what I am saying is that you can't buy your education from me or your education from the university. You can be given opportunities. And I also think that £9,000 gives the wrong signal from that point of view, because it gives the impression that you personally are buying something, and that's not what it's about. We're not educating you for you, I'm afraid. We're educating you for society so that we don't end up as, a load of savages, which is what, we are going that way. I mean, I am genuinely worried about it. I really disagree with the idea of the marketisation of the university. And this is not a political point necessarily. As I was saying to you earlier, Sam, my father was an academic as well. My father is an academic who has very different political views from me. Get him on the subject of the marketisation of the university and the idea that education is a kind of service or something you can, pay for in a straightforward way. And it's very interesting that anybody who has done any serious education understands why the university should not be marketised.
Okay, thank you. Mary, obviously you're in a slightly different position to Tess in relation to the idea of reimbursement. Do you support the decision to not reimburse students as well? I know it's probably perhaps a different kettle of fish for you.
I'm personally quite torn on the issue. I think, we just shouldn't be paying £9,000.
Yeah.
But that, it's not a separate issue, but that's how it is. We are paying £9,000 a year, which is too much, and that's why, personally, when I heard about the strikes, I was like, oh my gosh, I want to get that back. And I think what Tess was saying is absolutely right about the fact that I think it's unproductive to work out how much you're going to lose per seminar, per lecture, or whatever, because that's not what we're paying for. We're paying for the opportunity to learn. So technically that can be sort of done with the library or with ourselves, but obviously that's not what we want. That's not why we came to university, and I think it's just generally it's unfair what's going on. But so I think, as she was saying, we're paying into the facilities, we're paying into all sorts of things. So it's very unproductive to be like, okay, I'm losing this much and this much, but from this seminar, etc. Because that's not what we're paying for. We're not paying for that service, and the marketisation is just that's just wrong. So I think in that sense that makes you think, okay, I'm not going to try and claim it back because we've still got the university still going. I'm still going to get a degree with a Russell Group name on, which I think is what we're paying for. But the problem is, it's £9,000 and it's a lot of money. And I think the issue rather is not the time that you're losing, not the service that you're losing. It's the fact that you have a contract with the university, and the contract says that you're going to get these certain things, and with the strikes going on, we're not getting these things. And for a lot of people, you know, for example, if they're graduating this year and, you know, they've got dissertations due, they're in a crucial part of their university career, and this is the most awfully timed thing, and their degree, their grade, their experience of university even is going to be affected by these strikes, and it might be, you know, a negative effect. It might drag them down a bit, and that's something for the rest of their lives. And so I can see why people want to claim their money back, like, absolutely. But I think that it's just, I really hope that there's some negotiations made and these strikes come to an end, because I think so many people, regardless of whether, you know, it's right or wrong to claim money back, people are going to try, I think. And I think that people should absolutely be allowed to try, because, you know, our contract's not being fulfilled, and that's going to affect you. That's going to affect you badly, and, you know, £9,000 is a lot of money to lose on something that you're not getting any value out of anymore. So, yeah, I think, I'm not sure. I can see why they've blocked it, but I don't think it's. I don't think it's very moral, to be honest, to block it. And I think it's kind of, regardless of whether you support the strike or don't support the strike. You know, I support the strike personally. That I think it's, you know, a good thing, and I completely understand the reasons why it's happening. And however, you know, I've still not got any lectures, which is annoying. So,
can I come back on that, Mary? I'm wondering about this idea that somehow your £9,000 pays for your education, because that's a fallacy. The £9,000 is not the real cost of your education at this university. It costs almost nothing to deliver English degrees, and a great deal to do any degree that has, you know, serious science stuff in it, okay? Mm-hmm. So the issue is that actually you're not paying fees. What you're paying is a version of tax. And it should, I mean, that's interesting in itself, is basically you're being asked to subsidise the degree of somebody who's doing a medical degree or a life science degree. So that in itself is interesting, isn't it? It goes to show that actually there is no strict correlation between what you pay and what you get. Yeah. And if you wanted value for money, you should have done medicine instead, because, you know, you would have got a lot more for £9,000 than
yeah.
But the issue, of course, is that opens a whole floodgate about how that £9,000 is not really paying for services or buying something. It's a kind of tax, but at a different place. It's a graduate tax that is forced on to those people who are doing university degrees, which is why it's fundamentally wrong, of course.
Yes, no, I agree with what you're saying, and I think unless you've sort of looked into this, you don't know that. Like, you genuinely come to university and you think you're paying £9,000 for your education, you know, regardless of whether that's the case or not. And so I think, you know, generally there's a lot of issues with tuition fees, and they're too high, and, you know, maybe they shouldn't be paid at all, but you know, regardless, I think people are frustrated because they think that money is going to their education, because, you know, people in the English department, for example, think that that's going towards their 8 contact hours.
It's only not, if I got paid that amount, as I like to say, if I got paid, you know. And of course the department doesn't get that. The department gets a fraction of that. The rest of it goes into the university services.
It's all very well to say that, you know, the UCU, when quizzed about this on Monday at the general meeting, said that they also oppose tuition fees. It's all very well saying you oppose tuition fees, but when you analyse the reality of it, tuition fees exist. English students paying £9,000 a year, and they're not getting their teaching. So is that just a bit of a cop-out to say you don't support tuition fees, which is why you also, by implication, don't support the reimbursement of students?
Well,
just to play devil's advocate.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question, Sam. But I think, actually, no. I mean, the issue is that, you know, if you consider what tuition fees actually are, they are not tuition fees. That's the issue. You know, so we don't support tuition fees because you know, you're not paying £9,000 to be tutored by me or anybody else. You know, you're paying, if you're an English student, much less than that. In fact, the rest of it's going elsewhere. So I do think that, you know, these things are tied together, because they are, you know, this kind of idea of internal markets within, you know, the higher education sector is really dangerous, and it's something that, you know, that we're, you know, now Theresa May's decided we're going to have differential tuition fees, so that, you know, if you go to a less good university, you have to pay less money. So how do you work out, you know, whether it's worth going to a less good university? I mean, so another thing that really annoys me is the idea that people go, yeah, well, it's worth going to this university because I'll earn more when I come out of the end of it at this university. I'm afraid that's not what education is about. I mean, obviously being educated does make you earn more, but it's not about earning more. It's not all about money. And the idea that somehow education is all about money, I mean, when did that happen? It's not. It is actually about making society better, and I don't mean that in a kind of woolly, let's all be nice to each other and, dance around in, with flowers around our neck kind of way. I mean, it is about making society better by preventing disease, making society better by preventing people being mean to each other in all sorts of ways. Education does have a real effect that isn't just about how much money I can earn at the end of it. Oh, for goodness sake, if I'd wanted to earn a load of money, I would not be being an academic. I would have gone into something better than that. Mm-hmm. If I were a civil servant, I'd earn a lot more. I think I'd be quite a good civil servant. I'm quite organised. Why aren't I a civil servant? Well, because what I really love is teaching young people things and teaching them how to think, So, I'm doing this job because I love it. Not because,
Okay.
I'm in it for the money. I mean, I'm not in it for the money, trust me.
Okay, I'm glad you mentioned that, actually. If it's not all about money, then why strike, Because essentially the reason you are striking is about pensions, which are, at the end of the day, money.
Yeah, it is. Okay, so there are reasons to strike that are not about money. I mean, it's about a just price, which is a very medieval, for a very medieval concept, isn't it? The idea that, if you do a good job and you have been promised that you will be, I mean, I don't want to go down the biblical route because that all goes very wrong, of course, with the parable of the talents, but anyhow. But what I do want to say is that, if you go into a profession accepting a relatively low wage, I mean, I accept that, I'm not on the breadline, it's true, but, in comparison to people who are as well educated as me, who have made different choices for different reasons, I do earn considerably less, okay? And I think if you accept that and you go into a profession like that, you do it because you love it, and you do it because it's enough money to make it manageable, and you also do it because you've been promised that there will be not even a huge pension. I mean, it's not a huge pension. I think my father, who was an academic for the whole of his career, I think he has a pension of about £30,000. So it's not like it's not like he's sitting on a pension pot that's paying out £80,000 a year. Like most successful businessmen or successful lawyers would be. Yeah, But the issue is £30,000 is guaranteed for him. Mm-hmm. And he knows that he's going to get that, and so he could do things with his life that he cared about, and he could do things that made the world a better place. I mean, I do believe that, and not just because he's my dad. And I think that if you've struck that deal suddenly for the deal to be changed for reasons which even most actuaries who aren't paid for by Universities UK agree are spurious, that's a real problem. It needs challenging, it needs negotiation, and that's what UUK won't do, is negotiate, unfortunately. And I don't really mind if my pension is not enormous, but I do mind if I don't know what my pension is going to be.
Okay, so it's more the symbolic nature of it, and
also the idea that symbolically moving risk from a pension scheme to the individual.
Yeah,
that's just wrong. I mean, what's the point of a pension scheme? I might as well just have a self-invested pension, shouldn't I? I mean, why? I'd just pull all my money out of USS and invest it myself. I'd probably be better off.
Okay. Final question, I think, before we wrap up. What form will the strike actually take? Very straightforward question.
Well, on strike days, the union has asked us not to do any of our normal teaching or administrative work. So in a day where I would have an office hour and some classes, I will not be going to those classes, and I will be not holding my office hour. Mm-hmm. My understanding is that one is not supposed to do any work that is related to teaching and administration on those days, and so for me, I think that probably means that I won't be answering email as well. I think I'm going to put an auto reply up that says I will be next answering email on the 1st of March, which is the next day that we're not on strike. We're also doing action short of a strike as well, and that is working to contract. Now, this is something else we haven't talked about, which is that most weeks I am contracted to do 36.5 hours a week. I cannot remember the last time I worked less than a 45-hour week. Sometimes I work weeks where I work every evening as well, and often at one day at the weekend. Rarely 2 days at the weekend, but often one day at the weekend. And this is, I'm not abnormal. I mean, I'm quite hardworking, but I'm not abnormal. So the issue is that if we actually work to contract, which is what we're being asked to do, unfortunately, we're not going to do all this work that we do for free for our employer. I mean, if I got paid overtime, I'd be super rich. You know, I really would be super rich if they paid me overtime. But of course, you know, we're professionals, so we don't get overtime. You know, because you just work until the job's done. So what that means is that we can't rearrange those classes that are scheduled for the days that we're having to cancel. Because if we did that, then we would be doing extra work. Now, the university has been Warwick has been a bit funny about whether or not we're going to be penalised for that. I mean, first of all, they said we were going to have 25% DOT for action short of a strike, and then they worked out that actually they couldn't do that because if they did that, then anybody who worked a contract, which is essentially what we're doing. I mean, you can't dock somebody money for working to contract. It's just that they rely on us doing much more than we actually do. So that will bite. You know, the fact is, in marking periods, after the strike is over, if we're still doing action short of a strike, you know, basically, you know, you're given, you know, some of my colleagues are given 45 essays that they have to turn around, 5,000 word essays which they have to turn around in a pretty short period of time. Right, it takes 5,000 word essay, even if you're being at your most efficient, it takes 30 to 40 minutes. And if you've got other things to do in the week, you know, it means you're working a 70-hour week. It means you basically mark all weekend as well, yeah? So the issue is that that's going to be a problem. That's going to be a problem if we get to action short of a strike, because marking is going to be slower because people will be working to contract, which means they'll be working on a 36.5-hour week. So that's what the strike and the action short of a strike are going to do.
Okay. Tess Grant, Mary Frances, thank you very much for joining me.